College football realignment has been off the rails for the past couple off seasons, and it's been pretty clear for a while to most what direction the sport is headed in. It's going to be the SEC and Big Ten head and shoulders above the rest. Now, do we know who's going to be in those conferences? No. We don't know what the postseason format will look like. We don't know if the rest of college football will be included or not. There's a number of scenarios that can still play out and a lot of unknowns. So today we're going to talk about going forward, the inevitable future, what it might look like, and what a few scenarios are for this new college football world that we will all be living in. Scenario 1 is a lot of people's greatest fear, and that's the SEC and the Big Ten break away from the NCAA entirely and leave the rest of college football behind, and there's no inclusion of the rest of college football. So what that would look like is the SEC and Big Ten essentially operating in a mini NFL league where their only games are either versus each other or cross-division through SEC and Big Ten. This would effectively kill a lot of iconic rivalries. Washington and Washington State would probably never play again. Oregon and Oregon State would probably never play again. We'd never see Oklahoma State play Oklahoma again. This would just essentially create a league where the SEC and Big Ten would control basically all of college football. And there are some positives that you could say here. The sport would become a lot more organized. There would be a lot more clear rules. You wouldn't have to deal with the NCAA creating obscure rules that are very difficult to follow. There's obviously a lot of cons with this as well, including the fact that many lower tier programs will likely die as a result of this. Like, I can't guarantee that Sam Houston State football will continue to exist, or that San Jose State or New Mexico or a lot of those smaller programs are going to be able to find a way to stay relevant in the college football sphere if something like this were to happen entirely. I do think a good side effect could be that there could be a trickle-up effect where teams start slowly getting added to the league when they're good enough, and maybe it starts to expand the league to where it looks a little bit more and feels a little bit more like classic college football. Like, let's say Florida State and Miami, Clemson, Notre Dame get added right off the bat. But over time, maybe an Arizona and an Arizona State get added. And maybe NC State and Oklahoma State get tossed into the mix. And maybe we start to get things slowly back to where they once were and get maybe 60 teams in the league after 20 years or something like that. That's something that would happen slowly over time, but it is something that I think could make this burn a little less for the more traditional fan and frankly for myself as well. Scenario 2 is that the SEC and Big Ten opt to stay connected with the rest of college football. Either they stay with the NCAA or just decide to continue to participate in a playoff format that's going to include all of college football. This is kind of just going to be the SEC and Big Ten dominating, but with inclusion. So a lot of these smaller programs over time are likely not going to be able to compete with the SEC and Big Ten. And in this format, yes, there will be an opportunity for those teams to pull upsets here and there, but the disparity in TV revenue and NIL money being generated and facilities and overall program, I think is slowly over time going to start to create a wider and wider gap. And you look at maybe if the Big 12 and ACC were to get some new conferences together to try and rival them, they could put compelling teams on the field, but they're not going to be able to compete, especially as the SEC and Big Ten continue to poach schools like the Florida State and Clemson that seem inevitable, maybe a Miami eventually over time. This is going to be a league where we kind of can still lie to ourselves and say, yeah, there's still 130 whatever teams that can compete for a national title, but we've always kind of been lying to ourselves when we say that. No group of 5 team was ever going to win a national title, especially with them getting promoted and to power conferences once they are good enough as a program. Like, even if you thought UCF and Cincinnati were on their way there, they eventually got added to a power program. So technically a group of 5 team couldn't win it there. In this scenario, it would be able to preserve a lot of those good things we like, and there would still be those rivalry games like Oregon versus Oregon State, but over time, we would just watch that gap continue to get wider and wider. So the SEC and Big Ten would still have all the power, and I honestly think even in this scenario, it's only a matter of time until the SEC and Big Ten get tired of messing around with all the little guys and say, it's more worth it for us to just break away entirely. So even in this scenario, it feels like scenario 1 feels inevitable eventually. Scenario 3 is one that starts with the same stipulations of Scenario 1. The SEC and Big Ten decide they're tired of the NCAA and they don't want to be connected with the rest of college football, and they separate themselves. They create their own miniature NFL league where they only play the teams within division. A lot of those small rivalries aren't played anymore, and they rely solely on the power of their massive brands to carry their league. Now, in Scenario 3, what would happen is then the rest of the conferences like the Big 12, ACC, and Pac-12 maybe get themselves back on their feet. The Group of Five is still a thing, and they just continue to operate in their own college football ecosystem, maybe putting some bylines and stuff in place that make it so they don't have to pay their players, and that's not a part of the sport anymore. Maybe classic college football that people are used to. In this scenario, people would look at the new Big Ten SEC league and they would notice it doesn't have a lot of the things that drew them to college football in the first place. And they still enjoy the other league that's going on because the Big Ten SEC league just reminds them of a polished, clean product like the NFL that's too corporatized, that has things that turn them off in general. So if that happens, it would be what made the sport special, staying intact. And yes, a smaller league, and yes, you could say it has less stakes and doesn't feel as cool because it's not at the same level talent-wise as those other ones. But as college football fans, I think it's about the tradition and the pageantry and the tailgating and the players wanting to play for your school that made them love the sport in the first place. So in this scenario, that would ultimately prevail and help the league out. The bad part about this scenario is that this will not happen. Unfortunately, all of the teams in the big leagues, in the Big Ten and the SEC are so popular and so well known generally that they're going to generate more revenue always. And that sport is going to continue to grow. If they go into their own league, it's not going to fail. They have enough recognizability and loyalty and fan bases that their league will be just fine. And in fact, any program that would be succeeding in the minor leagues like the Big 12, ACC, Pac-12 that really does well, if they get an invite to that bigger league, they would likely take it because a lot of what matters to all of the people making these decisions is one thing, and it's money. And so this scenario is nothing but a fever dream, a fleeting hope that maybe the purity of the sport will be something that thrives, but I honestly just don't see a scenario where that happens. I apologize for my negative tone in this video, but whenever I talk about realignment or some of the new things happening in college football, it just kind of has that spin because me personally, I hate most of the stuff that's happening to the sport. But if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff down in the comments, and I appreciate you guys for watching. I will see you guys later.